The sun was barely up when the black sedan rolled through the tall iron gates of the Hawthorne estate. Inside the mansion, everything was as perfect as the billionaire himself demanded. Gleaming marble floors, fresh white lilies in crystal vases, and silence thick enough to feel. But beneath that perfection, there was something broken, something that no amount of money could fix. Nathan Hawthorne, the only son of billionaire Richard Hawthorne, sat slumped over his math workbook at the breakfast table. His blonde hair was messy, his eyes heavy with frustration, and his pencil lay snapped in two. The numbers on the page didn't make sense. They never did. And every failed test only reminded him that he wasn't the genius his father wanted him to be. From the corner of the room, the head housekeeper glanced nervously at the boy before turning toward the man, reading his morning paper. "Sir, the new maid is here," she said quietly. Richard didn't even look up. "Just make sure she knows her place," he replied coldly, folding the newspaper and standing. "And tell Nathan he has another tutor coming this evening. I'm done wasting money on incompetence." Nathan stared down at his plate, his appetite gone. Tutors came and went. None stayed long. They all said the same thing, that he didn't try hard enough, that he was distracted, lazy, spoiled. But no one ever saw the way his hands shook when his father raised his voice, or how his heart raced every time he heard the word failure. That afternoon, a quiet knock echoed through the mansion. Standing in the doorway was a woman in her early 40s, holding a small worn suitcase. Her uniform was simple, her posture humble, but her eyes, deep, calm, and kind, seemed to hold something different. Her name was Grace. She had come to work as a maid, not a tutor. But that evening, fate had something else planned. Nathan barely noticed her at first. She cleaned silently, humming a tune he didn't recognize. But when she passed by his table and saw the pile of crumpled math papers, she paused. "Numbers giving you trouble?" she asked softly. Nathan looked up, startled. No one in the house ever spoke to him like that. Not with patience, not with warmth. He shrugged, muttering, "They always do." Grace smiled faintly. "Maybe it's not about the numbers," she said. "Maybe it's about how you're looking at them." She gently picked up his paper, her eyes scanning the messy calculations. Then, to his surprise, she pulled up a chair. "Would you mind if I showed you something?" Nathan hesitated. His father's voice echoed in his mind. Don't waste time with the help. But something about her tone made him nod. Grace leaned closer, her voice calm and steady, and began explaining in a way he had never heard before. Simple, clear, patient. For the first time, the numbers started to make sense. And just when Nathan's face lit up with understanding, the door opened. Richard Hawthorne stood there, his expression frozen as he saw his son laughing with the maid. The room went silent. Grace slowly set down the pencil. Nathan's smile faded. That moment would change everything. Richard's eyes narrowed as he stepped farther into the room, his polished shoes echoing against the marble floor. "What's going on here?" he asked sharply, his gaze shifting from Grace to his son. Nathan froze, gripping the edge of the table. The warmth that had filled the room just moments ago vanished like a candle in the wind. I was just helping him with his homework, sir," Grace said quietly. Standing up, her tone was respectful, but there was something steady in her eyes, something that didn't bend under his stare. Richard glanced at the open workbook on the table. The corrected numbers, the scribbled explanations in neat handwriting that clearly wasn't his son's. "You're the maid, not a tutor," he said coldly. "If my son needs help, he'll get it from professionals, not from the staff." Grace nodded, lowering her gaze, but Nathan spoke up before she could reply. "She explained it better than any of the tutors, Dad," he said, his voice trembling but determined. For the first time, I actually understood. Richard's jaw tightened. "Nathan, go to your room." His words cut through the air like a blade. Nathan wanted to protest, but one look at his father's face silenced him. He gathered his papers and walked out, glancing back at Grace with a mixture of gratitude and fear. When Nathan disappeared up the stairs, Richard turned back to her. "I don't pay you to teach." "Know your place," he said, his voice cold but oddly restrained. Grace only nodded again. "Of course, sir." But as he walked away, Something in her expression changed, a flicker of quiet defiance that no one saw. That night, Nathan couldn't sleep. The rain tapped softly against the window, and he kept replaying a moment in his mind. How Grace had made math seem easy, almost fun. She hadn't judged him or sighed in frustration like the others. Instead, she had smiled every time he got closer to the right answer. There was something about her, something that made him feel safe in a house that rarely did. The next morning, he saw her again in the garden, trimming the roses near the fountain. The smell of wet earth filled the air. Nathan hesitated, then walked over, his math book tucked under his arm. "Can you show me again?" he asked shyly. Grace looked around, making sure no one was watching, then smiled. "Only if you promise to keep it our little secret." Their lessons continued in quiet corners of the house, behind the library shelves, near the kitchen when everyone was busy, even in the garden under the old oak tree. Grace never made him feel small for not knowing something. She taught him with stories, connecting numbers to real things, like recipes, time, or the rhythm of a song. Nathan began to look forward to every lesson. But secrets don't stay hidden forever in the Hawthorne mansion. One evening, as Nathan was laughing softly while Grace explained fractions using slices of apple pie, a shadow appeared in the hallway. It was Mrs. Kent, the head housekeeper. Her eyes widened when she saw them, her expression torn between surprise and fear. She didn't say anything then, but the next morning, Richard received a quiet word from her. His face hardened as he listened. By noon, Grace was called into his office. Nathan waited outside the door, his heart racing as muffled voices rose inside. He couldn't hear what was being said, but he could feel it. Something was about to change. When the door finally opened, Grace stepped out, her face calm but her eyes heavy. She gave Nathan a small, reassuring smile before walking away down the long marble hall. Nathan wanted to call out to her, to ask if everything was okay, but something in her expression stopped him. It was a look of someone who knew a storm was coming, and there was no stopping it. The mansion felt different after that day, colder, quieter, almost watchful. Grace went about her work as usual, polishing, cleaning, and tending the garden, but Nathan noticed how she avoided staying in one place for too long. She no longer lingered near the study or passed by his table when he did homework. It was as if she had built an invisible wall between them. Nathan tried to focus, but without her calm voice guiding him, the numbers began to blur again. One evening, while Richard was away at a business meeting, Nathan gathered the courage to find her. He walked down the back corridor toward the servants' quarters, a part of the house he had never dared to enter before. The narrow hall smelled faintly of soap and old wood. He found her sitting by a small window, mending a torn curtain. The light from the moon fell across her face, soft and thoughtful. "Why did you stop helping me?" he asked quietly. Grace looked up, a gentle sadness in her eyes. "Because your father asked me to," she replied. "He believes he's protecting you." Nathan frowned. "Protecting me from what?" "From learning." Grace smiled faintly but didn't answer. She set down her needle and folded the fabric carefully. "Sometimes people are afraid of what they don't understand, Nathan," she said. "And sometimes they hide truths because they think it's safer that way." Her words lingered in his mind long after he left. That night, while lying in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about her tone, how it sounded like she was talking about more than just math. There was something deeper, something personal she wasn't saying. Over the next few days, the house buzzed with tension. Richard seemed distracted, spending more time locked in his study, pacing late into the night. Nathan overheard fragmented conversations on the phone, mentions of foundation, an old friend, and a name he didn't recognize, Evelyn. Whenever Richard noticed Nathan nearby, he'd lower his voice. Meanwhile, the staff whispered too. Nathan caught bits of talk when they thought he wasn't listening. Some said Grace had once been a teacher before working here. Others claimed she had known the family years ago, long before Nathan was born. No one seemed to know the full truth, but everyone sensed there was something unusual about her. One afternoon, Nathan found something strange while searching for a pencil in the old storage room. A photograph tucked inside a book. It showed a young woman standing beside a man who looked remarkably like his father, only younger. The woman's smile was unmistakable. It was Grace. His heart skipped. He flipped the photo over and saw a faded date scrawled on the back, nearly 15 years before he was born. Questions flooded his mind. How did his father know her? Why had she returned now, working as a maid under a false name? And why did she look at him sometimes with that soft, familiar sadness, as if she saw more in him than he understood himself? That evening, Richard announced suddenly that Grace would be leaving by the end of the week. The words hit Nathan like a blow. He tried to speak, but his father's tone made it clear the decision wasn't open for discussion. "It's for the best," Richard said simply. But Nathan couldn't accept that. Something inside him refused to believe this was just about a maid breaking the rules. There was a connection between them, a secret his father was determined to keep buried. As the days passed and Grace's departure grew closer, Nathan became restless. He needed answers, and on the final night before she was set to leave, he decided he would find them, no matter what it took. The night before Grace was supposed to leave, the air inside the mansion felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. Rain had begun to fall again, tapping softly against the windows, and distant thunder rolled across the dark sky. Nathan sat at his desk, staring at the photograph he had found, the one of Grace and his father, standing close, smiling, as if they once shared a past that no one wanted him to know. Every time he looked at it, more questions filled his head. He couldn't stay still any longer. Quietly, he slipped out of his room and padded down the long hallway. The lights were dim, most of the staff asleep. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the sound of rain filled the silence. Grace's room was at the far end of the servants' quarters. He paused outside her door, hesitating, then knocked softly. After a moment, the door opened a few inches. Grace stood there, wearing a simple robe, her eyes weary but calm. "Nathan, what are you doing up?" she asked softly. He held out the photo with trembling hands. "Why are you in this picture with my father?" For a second, she said nothing. Her face went pale, and she looked at the photo as though it were something she had tried to forget for years. "Where did you find this?" she whispered. Nathan stepped closer. "Please, just tell me the truth." Grace closed the door behind him and sat down on the small chair by the bed. She took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly together. "Your father and I, we knew each other a long time ago," she said quietly. "Before you were born, before he became the man he is now." Her voice trembled slightly as she continued. "I used to teach at a public school. Your father was a volunteer there. Back then, he wasn't the powerful businessman everyone sees today. He cared about people. He wanted to help. But things changed when the money came. People around him changed him." She paused, looking away. "We lost touch until I came here." Nathan listened, his heart pounding. "Then why did you come back?" he asked. Grace hesitated, her eyes glistening. "Because there's something I needed to see for myself," she said softly. "Something I couldn't stay away from any longer." Before Nathan could ask what she meant, the sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor. Steady, firm, unmistakable. His father. Grace's face went still. "Go," she whispered urgently. "You shouldn't be here." But before he could move, the door swung open. Richard stood there, his expression hard, his eyes full of disbelief and anger. "So this is what you've been hiding," he said coldly. "You've been filling my son's head with lies." "Richard, no," Grace began, standing up, but his voice thundered over hers. "Enough. I should have known the moment you walked through that door that you had an agenda." Nathan stepped forward, his voice shaking. "She wasn't lying. She helped me. She's the only one who ever cared." Richard's expression softened for the briefest second before hardening again. "You don't understand, Nathan. There are things you don't know about her." "Then tell me," Nathan pleaded. "Tell me the truth." But Richard didn't answer. He turned toward Grace, his voice lower now, filled with something between anger and pain. "You should have stayed away," he said. Grace met his gaze without flinching. "Maybe," she said quietly. "But you can't hide the truth forever, Richard. He deserves to know who I really am." The silence that followed was deafening. Nathan looked between them, confused, his heart racing. The rain outside grew louder, lightning flashing across the room. Grace's eyes were full of tears she refused to let fall. Richard's hand clenched at his side, as if holding back words he didn't want to speak. And in that moment, just before everything was about to come undone, the storm outside seemed to break loose, shaking the windows. Nathan didn't know it yet, but what he was about to learn would change everything he thought he knew about his family, his father, and the woman who had quietly taught him not just math, but something far greater. The thunder outside crashed so loudly it felt like the sky itself was breaking open. Nathan stood frozen between his father and Grace, his heart pounding, the tension in the room so sharp it almost hummed. Grace finally turned to him, her voice low but steady. "Nathan, your father doesn't want me here because I'm not just a maid," she said softly. "I came here because of you." Richard's face went pale. "Stop," he warned, but Grace didn't. "He's hidden the truth from you for years," she continued, her eyes glistening. "Nathan, Before she could finish, Richard slammed his hand against the doorframe. "That's enough, Grace," he shouted, his voice shaking with fury and fear. For the first time, Nathan saw something in his father's eyes that wasn't authority. It was desperation. "Why are you yelling at her?" Nathan demanded. "You've been lying to me. You both have." He turned toward Grace, confusion clouding his face. "What truth? What are you talking about?" Grace took a trembling breath, her gaze shifting between father and son. "You deserve to know who I really am," she said quietly. "But I can't tell you everything yet. Not here, not like this. There's something you need to see first." Richard stepped closer, his voice tight. "You will not drag him into this," he said through clenched teeth. "Whatever you think you're doing, you're going to stop now." But Grace didn't back down. She reached into her small bag and pulled out an old, folded document. "You've kept this buried long enough, Richard," she said. "It's time he knows the truth about where he came from." Nathan's hands trembled as he reached for the paper. But before he could take it, Richard snatched it away. "You don't understand what this will do," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "It will destroy everything I built, everything he's known." Grace's eyes softened. "Maybe it's time for that, Richard," she whispered. "Maybe it's time he knows who's really been protecting him all along." Nathan stared between them, his mind spinning. "Protecting me? From what?" he asked, his voice cracking. But neither of them answered. The silence stretched, filled only by the steady drumming of rain on the window. And then, just as the air seemed to settle, the lights flickered and went out. The mansion plunged into darkness. Nathan gasped, "Dad." "I'll check the generator," Richard muttered, grabbing a flashlight and heading for the hallway. But before he could leave, Grace caught his arm. "He's old enough now," she said firmly. "You can't keep running from the truth." Richard pulled away, his jaw tight, and disappeared down the dark hall. Nathan turned toward Grace, his voice shaking. "Please, just tell me what's going on." Grace hesitated. "Your father doesn't want you to know because the truth isn't simple," she said. "It's about your mother and about me." Nathan's breath caught. "My mother? But she died before I was born." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "That's what you were told," she said softly. "But not everything in this house is what it seems. The woman you think died, she's not gone, Nathan. And your father has spent years making sure no one finds out." Before Nathan could respond, a loud crash echoed from downstairs, glass shattering, a door slamming open. Grace's head snapped toward the noise. "Stay here," she whispered urgently. But Nathan didn't listen. He followed her down the grand staircase, his heart pounding in his ears. The flashlight beam flickered across the marble floor, where shards of glass glittered. The front door was wide open, the storm raging outside. Richard was nowhere in sight. Grace's voice trembled. "No, it's happening again." Nathan looked at her, confused and terrified. "What's happening again?" he asked. She turned toward him, her face pale and frightened now, every trace of calm gone. "The same thing that happened the night your mother disappeared," she whispered. And before he could speak, the wind howled to the open doorway, carrying with it the faint sound of footsteps coming from the dark. The storm outside raged like it was echoing the chaos inside the Hawthorne mansion. Nathan's breath came fast as he followed Grace toward the open front door, rain whipping against their faces. The sound of those distant footsteps grew louder, slow and deliberate, until a shadow appeared at the edge of the driveway. Lightning flashed, and for a split second, Nathan saw the figure clearly. It was his father, soaked and trembling, holding a small metal box in his hands. "Richard!" Grace shouted over the wind, rushing toward him. But Richard didn't answer. He looked at her with a strange mix of pain and surrender. "I can't hide it anymore," he said quietly, his voice breaking. "He deserves the truth." Grace stopped a few steps away, her eyes full of emotion. "Then tell him," she said softly. "Tell him what really happened that night." Nathan looked between them, heart pounding. "What night? What are you talking about?" Richard turned toward him, his face lined with guilt. "The night your mother died," he said. "It wasn't what you've been told." He opened the metal box with shaking hands. Inside were old photographs, letters, and a hospital bracelet, tiny, with the name Nathan Hawthorne written on it. "Your mother didn't die in an accident," Richard continued, his voice thick. "She fell ill, and there were complications during childbirth. The doctors said she wouldn't make it. But then Grace stepped in. She was your mother's closest friend and the only person she trusted." Grace's eyes shimmered with tears as she looked at Nathan. "Your mother made me promise something before she passed," she said softly. "She begged me to look after you, to protect you if anything ever happened to her." Nathan's throat tightened. "Protect me from what?" "From the people who wanted to control your father," she said. "The business, the fortune, it came with powerful enemies. After your mother's death, someone tried to take you away. Richard sent you into hiding for months until it was safe. I was the one who stayed close, watching from a distance all these years." Nathan's mind reeled. "So you came back to protect me again?" Grace nodded. "When I heard the threats had started again, I applied for the maid's job under a different name. I didn't come here for pity, Nathan. I came because I made a promise, to your mother and to you." Richard looked at her, his eyes full of gratitude and regret. "I was wrong to keep it from him," he said. "You've done more for him than I ever did." For a brief moment, it felt like the storm was easing. The truth was out, the air between them finally clear. But then, just as Nathan began to breathe again, Grace's expression changed. She was staring at the gate, her face pale. A black car was parked at the edge of the property, its headlights cutting through the rain. Two men in dark suits stepped out, their movements slow and deliberate. Richard's voice dropped. "They found us." Grace grabbed Nathan's arm, her calm composure returning in an instant. "Get inside," she whispered. "Lock every door." But Nathan didn't move. "Who are they?" he asked, fear creeping into his voice. Richard looked at him, the truth heavy in his eyes. "The reason I built all this," he said, "to keep them away from you." Grace turned toward him. "It's time to finish what your mother started," she said quietly. Then she reached into the metal box and pulled out a folded letter, pressing it into Nathan's hands. "When it's safe, read this. You'll understand everything." The men were closer now, their footsteps splashing through the puddles. Lightning cracked again, and for a moment, all three of them stood in the storm. Father, son, and the woman who had held their lives together in secret. Then the screen door slammed shut behind them, and the sound of engines filled the night. When the storm finally passed, the driveway was empty. Grace was gone. Only the letter remained, clutched tightly in Nathan's hand. And as he unfolded it later, reading the first trembling line, "My dearest Nathan, if you are reading this, it means Grace kept her promise." He realized the truth wasn't over yet. It was only beginning. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the mansion surrounded by silence. The sky was washed clean, soft light spilling through the tall windows. Nathan sat on the edge of his bed, the letter still open in his hands. He had read it over and over until the words blurred together, but each line still echoed in his heart. In the letter, his mother had written about her love for him, about how she had known even before his birth that his life would be different. She spoke about Richard's ambition, his fears, and the dangerous people who had once tried to control their family. But most of all, she wrote about Grace, the woman she trusted more than anyone. "If anything ever happens to me," the letter said, "Grace will find a way to reach you. She will teach you more than numbers or lessons. She will teach you how to see the good in people, even when the world tries to hide it." Nathan folded the letter carefully, his chest tight with emotion. Grace had kept that promise, just as his mother believed she would. She had been there all along, watching over him quietly, never asking for recognition. When Richard entered the room, he looked older than Nathan had ever seen him. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by something gentler, something human. "I know you have questions," he said quietly, taking a seat beside his son. "There are things I can't undo, but I want to make it right." Nathan looked at him, unsure where to start. "Why didn't you ever tell me about her?" Richard sighed. "Because I was afraid. After your mother died, I lost everything that mattered. I thought if I built walls high enough around the house, around our lives, I could protect you. But those walls only kept the truth out." Nathan nodded slowly, his anger softening. "Grace didn't come here to hurt us," he said. "She was trying to save what was left." "I know," Richard replied, his voice thick, "and I let my pride blind me to that." He paused, glancing toward the window. "She left before dawn. I think she wanted to keep us safe from whatever was coming, but she'll come back when it's time." Days passed, and life at the mansion began to feel different. The silence wasn't as heavy anymore. Nathan studied every evening, using the lessons Grace had taught him, learning not just about numbers, but about patience, kindness, and courage. Richard started spending more time with him, slowly letting go of his strictness and learning how to be a father again. One evening, as Nathan worked on his math homework by the window, he noticed something in the garden. A small bouquet of white lilies resting on the bench where Grace used to sit. There was no note, no sign of who had left them. But Nathan smiled. He didn't need one. He knew. He picked up the flowers and placed them on the kitchen table, right beside his mother's letter. Then he whispered softly, "Thank you, Grace, for everything." That night, as he drifted to sleep, Nathan felt a strange peace settle over him. The mansion no longer felt like a cage of secrets. It felt like home again. The truth, though painful, had set them free. Outside, the moonlight touched the roses Grace had tended with such care, and somewhere beyond the gates, perhaps watching from a distance, a woman smiled, quietly proud that the boy she once promised to protect had finally found his way. And in that calm, still night, Nathan realized something his mother had written was true. Sometimes the people who change our lives the most aren't the ones born into our story. They're the ones brave enough to walk into it.